Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Speed Mooting Conversations with Counsel podcast. I'm the host, John Dove, and today we have a very special guest. She is a criminal barrister at Albion Chambers, and it's Emilene Davis. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi John, thanks for having me.
No, thank you very much for coming along. So we always like to start our episodes with a bit of an easy quick-fire question, just so our audience can get a flavour of our guest. So a bit of a left-field question, but would you like to start by telling us about what you do in your spare time?
Yeah, sure. In my spare time, I like to do sort of yoga and be outdoors. So I like to do coast steering, jumping off cliffs down in Devon and things like that. I think it's a nice change of scenery, you know, when you kind of have a desk job or you're in court often. I think it's quite nice to get outdoors and be a bit more active. So that's
Absolutely.
Sort of
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Did you say you jump off cliffs?
yeah. So in Devon, you get like these coast steering activities where you kind of get to swim to the cliffs and then climb up them and then jump off them.
Oh, amazing. So how high are those cliffs?
They range, but it's scary because what you don't realise is it's not just the distance between the cliff and the sea. You keep going afterwards when you hit the sea. So it's kind of a lot further down than you think that you're going to go.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
imagine. I've done it when you go on holiday and you go on a boat trip and you jump maybe 10 feet or something. And even then, you travel a fair distance down. So if you're jumping off a cliff, wow, you must go really deep.
Yeah, but it's awesome. I really enjoy it. It's so much fun.
Well, we'll jump in. I'll ask you some legal questions to start. So the first one, I'm going to start by asking about your experience, Emilene. And the first question is, why is it that you initially chose a career in law?
I think that when I was younger, I used to really enjoy theatre. And so I was always like writing musicals and being in musicals and things like that. And later in life, I realised that what I enjoy is the storytelling.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I started A-level law that I thought, oh wow, I really enjoy law. I quite like the problem solving aspect of it and using your sort of analytical skills to look at a problem and solve it. And then I thought what married with that perfectly was criminal law, because you get to do the legal analysis, but then you also get to kind of tell the story, whether it's a plea of mitigation or whether you're in trial and you're doing a closing speech. I thought the storytelling aspect was really what drove me to criminal law in particularly.
Yeah, brilliant. That's a really interesting backstory. And I think as well, coming back to what you're saying there, the background in theatre, that really lends itself very well to criminal law because, particularly when you've got your jury speech, your closing speech, that's the time to be nice and theatrical, isn't it? I think for me personally, there's just nothing like a closing speech. And I think if you're in another area of law, you're only presenting to a judge, obviously it's a lot more sort of formal, a lot more business-like, whereas when you're presenting to members of the public in the jury, I think your theatrical skills will really come in quite handy there.
Yeah, it surprises me how many people in law have a theatre background. I know that when I was doing pupillage and we were sort of all getting to know one another, a lot of us were sharing that we have a background in theatre. And what we thought set us apart for sort of pupillage interviews, we're like, oh no, we're all like copy and paste.
Well, funnily enough, you're the second guest on this podcast that has a background in theatre, so yeah, quite common. I have to say, I don't have that background myself, but yeah, it's really interesting that. So, looking at your background, before you started at the bar, you interned at Sheldon and Flood in the US. Would you like to tell me a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, it was a fantastic experience. I'm so glad that I did it. It really is what kind of cemented for me that I wanted to do crime. Obviously, the stakes in the UK with losing your liberty for potentially a long period of time is, very important. But being in America and seeing that it can result in you losing your life was something entirely apart. And I thought that it really made me realise the gravity of what we do as criminal practitioners. And what I was doing in that role was a lot of legal research and a lot of client care. And I think that gave me a really good foundation for the career that I do now, because it is a lot of legal research. I was surprised by how much research and how much law there is in criminal law. I think a lot of students think it's more of a factual area of law, and sort of you have a trial, you did it, no I didn't, yeah, you did. But actually there's so much law to it, and there's so many legal arguments to have. So having that experience at Sheldon, Flood and Haywood, where I was able to do legal research and really get to the bones of how to construct a legal argument, was a really great experience. But then also having that client care, not just client care, being able to deal with the relatives, because a lot of the time when you get a defendant at court, they'll be there with their family, and it's a very difficult balance to strike, because you've got your duty of confidentiality to your client, but at the same time you've got these people that really care about your client and they want to know what's going on. And so I think that having that opportunity at a very early stage to practice my client care skill, as well as sort of other family members, but balancing that with confidentiality, was a really good experience.
Yeah, wow, that sounds really interesting. And as you say, I mean, I think one of the key skills for a criminal barrister really is client care and managing expectation. And I think, as you say, you've done it at the top level where the stakes quite literally couldn't be any higher. So having that experience before you've even started pupillage will have really helped you when you came into practice, I would imagine, as a criminal barrister.
I think so.
So from there, I understand that you worked as a litigator as well, with two national firms. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about that, and maybe how that experience has helped shape you as a criminal barrister?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of the reason I went into those roles really is because I was really struggling with civil litigation. I found it so hard to get my head around, just because I felt like it was quite dry reading. I felt that I needed some practical experiences so that I could be like, oh, I know what a summary judgment is because I've dealt with that. So I thought that I would look at civil litigator roles, because I'm not from a legal background in terms of my family. There's no one in my family that are lawyers. And I thought that being in Bristol, having some exposure to the legal community would be beneficial to me, but also doing it in an area that I didn't necessarily want to practice in my future, but that would be immediately helpful to me, was probably sensible. And I couldn't imagine how it was going to equip me for my now practice, because you get so much experience again with client care, which is so important in crime, but also drafting legal documents, so defence statements. You draft defence statements in crime, and so just having that ability to draft a document is an experience that I found really useful when I was working as a litigator. And I also was quite lucky in my second role as a litigator. I was able to go to court on my own small claims to represent clients. And so that gave me some really good experiences as an advocate.
Yeah, you've literally hit the nail on the head there. Because I've got a similar sort of background. So I paralegaled doing civil litigation before I actually qualified as, or obtained my training contract to become a solicitor. And I got my training contract in crime. And it's interesting what you say there about the parallels. And I used all of that experience and talked about that during my training contract interview. So similarly to yourself, did a little bit of advocacy in district judges' chambers, and I talked about how that would help me ultimately to become a solicitor advocate. And likewise, the amount of drafting you have to do, and the number of sort of interlocutory applications that come up all the time. You need to do those, and it really prepares you. Because let's be honest, as criminal barristers, we don't do as much drafting as civil barristers do. But it's still a crucial skill. We still need to do that. We still need to draft our defence statements and things of that nature. So that we're literally on all fours there in terms of that previous experience and how that's helped us. So that you explained that really well, Emilene. So from there, obviously you went on practicing at Albion Chambers. So do you want to talk to us about your experience of obtaining pupillage?
Yeah, it was kind of weird for me in terms of the whole pupillage experience, because I know a lot of people apply for pupillage while they're doing the bar course, but for me, I decided that I wanted to wait until I'd finished, so I knew what my grade was. And I just found, because I was doing it part-time alongside work and studies, I thought that adding anything on top was probably going to stretch me too thin, and I wanted to be able to commit to it fully. And it just so happened that COVID began just as I started putting my applications in. So my first rounds, I got a couple of interviews, but then all of the interviews were cancelled because of COVID. So terrible luck there. But at least I felt confident in my applications, because I saw that they were getting me interviews. And so I decided that what I would focus on the next round was, again, tailoring those applications to any new places that I applied, but focusing my time on preparing for interview skills, because I knew that that was maybe the area that I needed to get a little bit more practice in. And so I didn't apply to many chambers. I know that a lot of people do kind of a scattergun approach and apply far and wide, but I've always really known that I wanted to practice in Bristol. I've got quite a strong regional accent. All of my family and friends are from Bristol, and so I didn't really want to move away from that. So I only applied for a handful of chambers, and I got a couple of interviews, got through to a couple of final round interviews, but then I was made first reserve for Albion. So I was quite happy with that, because I thought, well, it's only my first time really having a go at the interview process, and I've done quite well to be made first reserve, and so it gave me a lot of confidence that if that didn't fall into place for me, then I could try again next year and I might have some luck. But as it happened, I had luck that year, because although the person who picked me to the post did accept their pupillage, Albion got a scholarship, the Butterfield Scholarship, which is a scholarship given to chambers on the Western Circuit. It's different chambers every year for a criminal pupil. And because that's what I wanted to do, and they'd already made me first reserve, they checked it off with the BSB, and they said that they could offer it to me rather than going through the process all over again next year.
Brilliant.
So I just had to wait for a year.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. That I mean, you say it's luck, but at the same time, I think you've taken a really sensible approach there, because even with the bar course, the fact that you're working at the same time, you're building up experience whilst you're doing the bar course. Whereas someone like myself, I made the mistake of going straight through law degree, BPTC, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. But the issue I had was when I came to apply, I had very little experience beyond academia. So I think you had a lot more to talk about. And I think by just limiting the number of applications that you did, I imagine you probably spent a lot more time on each individual application, so they were a lot stronger. So quite a sensible approach that you've taken there.
Yeah, I'm not really risk averse. I'm not really someone who's going to take that many risks in that way. I'm more, I pace myself a little bit, and I know my limits, and so I think that was important for me.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very sensible approach to take. So, Emilene, I understand that you've previously done some lecturing. So, how do you find that lecturing compares to the practice of law?
I used to really enjoy lecturing, and it's funny because it's not something that I ever thought that I'd want to do. But the opportunity came up when I was sort of in my final year of bar school, and I thought, well, I'll try. I'm sort of the sort of person that will say yes to things, to rule it in or out. Yeah, I don't know if I like something unless I try it. And so the opportunity came up, and I said yes. And I think that what works really well in terms of lecturing and then being in practice is that presentational skills. Being able to stand in front of a room of people, and actually students can be quite intimidating because you don't know what they're going to ask, you don't know what they're thinking, so it can be quite daunting actually to lecture in front of students, and I never imagined that would be the case because I'm quite a confident public speaker. So I think that having that opportunity to lecture helped me develop my presentational skills, but I also think again it was just having that opportunity to really think analytically about the law and how it applies in different sets of circumstances. And actually what was always really interesting is that the students would come up with questions that you hadn't really thought of yourself, and so I think it was constantly helping me to develop and deepen my understanding.
Yeah, absolutely, and no doubt that will have helped you with your ability to deal with judicial intervention in the Crown Court as well, thinking on your feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've had such a varied career already, and you're willing to try lots of new things. And it's something that, I often give that piece of advice to students, particularly when, you might go in for a pupillage or a training contract interview. Oh, why don't you want to be a solicitor? Why don't you want to do this type of law? If you've tried something, at least you can rule it out. So I think that's something that students can really pick up from your experience and your background there, Emilene. Last sort of question about your background. Do you have a highlight from your career so far?
It has to be getting tenancy, I think. I know that's probably the obvious one, but I think because it is so recent still, it is still sort of a moment that makes me really, really proud. Yeah. And seeing my name go on Chambers' door, that was massive.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on now and start talking about maybe some advice that you might have for aspiring lawyers. So the first question I've got for you, do you have any advice for anybody that's just starting out? So maybe they've just started their law degree or just started the conversion course.
Yeah, I think it's actually really interesting because it comes off the back of what we were just discussing about trying things. When I was in law school, I think I would go to careers advisors and ask them what sort of things I should be doing, and then I would make sure I was ticking off those activities almost like a checklist rather than actually immersing myself in the experience to see if I liked it or not. It wasn't really about finding out whether or not I liked this particular activity, so whether it be mooting or debating or mini pupillages, whatever it might have been. It was more about ticking the boxes and actually really getting the experience and benefiting from that experience. Whereas in hindsight, I think what I would definitely advise students in particularly is to not just tick the boxes, try lots of different things, and if you like it, then fantastic, it gives you more options. And if you don't, like you say in those interviews, you've got an informed reason to say why you don't want to do those things, rather than just, well, I know I want to do X. How can you know that you want to do X if you've never considered why?
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant advice there. So thinking back then to your days as a student, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I would have read my feedback and actually tried to take it on board. I think what I had a habit of doing was looking at the grade and seeing whatever it was and either being happy or disappointed and then not really doing much more about it. Whereas I think looking back, feedback's so beneficial. Even now when I get feedback in court from other barristers or from judges or whoever it might be, actually taking it on board and thinking about how it can help you improve, even if it's good feedback, then just remember, well, that worked really well, I should do that again. Or if you get some constructive criticism, take it on board and think, okay, well, I won't do that next time because it wasn't very effective. But I think when I used to get my results, I would just look at the number and that would be it. I wouldn't really read the feedback.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant advice, because that's the only way that you learn, isn't it? Make mistakes, receive feedback, and improve. And I think that's one of the nice things about our profession, that the more experienced barristers are willing to provide feedback. So at the end of a case, you've been going at it to the nail with your opponent, but then in the robing room afterwards, they're still willing to give you a piece of advice. And I'm always grateful when more experienced barristers give advice to me as well. So that's one of the nice things about our profession.
Absolutely. It's something that surprised me as well. I didn't think about the sort of camaraderie of the bar when I first entered, and it was such a welcome surprise to see that people are really collegiate, because you think of it as lots of self-employed people just in the robing room, and you hear stories about robing rooming, but I think that actually there's a really good camaraderie at the bar.
Yeah, I would agree. So this is the $1,000,000 question. What do you think makes a good barrister?
It's a very good question. I think that, again, it kind of comes back to something that we've already covered, and it's that client care. I think that is essential, because all lawyers should know the law. I think that should be the foundation, that should be the starting point. But I think what sets apart someone who's a lawyer and someone who's a good lawyer is that client care skill, the ability to actually be personable and understand what that person is going through in that moment. Because sometimes I think if you can't break down that barrier with a client, you can't get all of the useful information that you need to really present their case, to defend them, or to mitigate for them. And so I think that's the difference between a barrister and a good barrister, is someone who can have that client care skill so they can actually get all of the important information necessary to present the case.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, client care is absolutely crucial in our profession. Yeah, really makes such a difference. Okay, we're going to finish with a few fun questions, Emily. So the the grilling is over now, so time for some nice fun ones just to finish up. So the first one, what was the last meal that you ate?
Oh, it's really rubbish. I had a cheese and coleslaw sandwich.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, little bit more exotic than mine. It was fish fingers and chips for me. What is your pet peeve?
Oh, it comes back to food actually. When people cham when they eat, it really
Chap.
annoys me. When when they make lots of noise when they're
Oh,
chewing.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If you could take one thing onto a desert island, what would it be?
Oh, a good book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, definitely a good book.
Yeah. And last one. If you weren't a lawyer, what would you be?
I think I tried to be an actress. I don't know if I get very far, but that's what I would try to do.
And I think, do you know what? I ask this question to most of my guests, and we've been talking about food. I'll ask you anyway. Crisps on a sandwich, do they belong?
Absolutely. Salt and vinegar. Proper.
Correct answer. Well, Emilene, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. You've been a brilliant guest, and you've provided some fantastic insight that I'm sure our listeners will find very useful. So thank you very much for taking the time to appear on our podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.